a very warm welcome to you all. As the invite for today's session emphasized, there has never been a time that we had needed a dose of happiness and positive energy more than now. As we continue through the national lockdown restrictions and economic turmoil, many people have been left disconnected, anxious, and isolated in this extremely difficult times. One of the central topics we would like to focus on in today's session is what thoughts, actions, and behaviors can make us happier despite the circumstances that surround us. We will look at ways of strengthening our relationships, fostering kinder self-talk, and hopefully leading more fulfilling lives. This ties into the field of positive psychology, often referred to as the science of happiness, which we will delve into deeper in tonight's session and in the next hour. Positive psychology doesn't turn a blind eye to suffering or psychological illness, but encourages us to adopt practices that can boost optimism, increase our resilience, and live happy, more engaged lives. There are various conceptions on and how-to guides on when it comes to happiness. However, not all of them are really based on science. Our guest for this evening has done extensive research into the science of happiness, and he's a specialist when it comes to emotional intelligence. I welcome MyGrow CEO, Mark Baker. Mark, welcome. Mark, don't you want to tell us a little bit about your background and what MyGrow does?
Yeah, thanks so much, Marina. I'm a psychologist. I am heading up a tech startup called MyGrow that develops emotional intelligence using technology, so on any device. And probably the best thing some of the listeners can hear about me, Marina, or about both of us, is you and I, Marina, have all of the training, all of the reading, all of the history in the field of psychology. And so we should be surely the happiest people around because we have all the knowledge about it, but I think if we were really honest with the listeners, that's probably not true, and there's very little correlation, unfortunately, between what you know about these things and the way they actually get lived out in your life. And so what I'm quite excited about this evening, I think, is just sharing from, as you've said, some of my experience. I just have a passion for the subject. So to share some of the subject relating to happiness, flourishing, well-being, etc. But then really to look at how we can apply it in our lives. It has been life-changing for me. It's part of why I live and breathe this stuff in my work. But I know it can be life-changing also for some of the listeners tonight. And of course, that's why Marina, you and Citadel have put this together. So I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much, Mark. And the excitement for hosting this session and having this as a specific feature is very near and dear to my heart as well as who and what we are as a business. So looking forward to spending the next 45 minutes to an hour with you. So Mark, what is happiness? How would you describe happiness and positive emotion as a psychological construct?
Yeah, Marina, I think that's the key question, is people constantly are wanting to be happy or elated or to feel good. And I think there's a huge amount of misunderstanding around what happiness is as a construct. And I think it's quite important to have a look at what it is as a construct. I'd love to just start by sharing just a couple of thoughts from a guy with the surname Ben Shahar, who actually is quite famous more in America because he was the lecturer of the most attended course at Harvard University. Believe it or not, but all of the top students from Harvard University would sign up in their droves year on year to go and attend his lectures on happiness. And of course, he was just sharing some of the initial research around the field of positive psychology. And he then summarized the construct of happiness like this: the overall experience of meaning and pleasure. And he was drawing a lot from some of the research of a big name in the field of positive psychology, that is Martin Seligman. Any of the listeners that have read anything on positive psychology will know Martin Seligman, who came from a history of traditional psychology as a clinical psychologist, and started having a look at how we can apply some of the methodologies from traditional psychology to normal functioning people. In other words, not people that have pathology and need to just get up to normal functioning, but those who can function reasonably normally and flourish. And so the whole world of positive psychology involves flourishing, well-being, and of course, this kind of theme word, happiness. And the reason why this definition I feel is quite important for us to look at tonight is that it's not only the pleasure part of it. We could look at it at being a momentary experience of pleasure, and then we would go the kind of sex, drugs, and rock and roll route, if it was a momentary experience of just pleasure. If we were going to talk about just meaning, well, then we would only be talking about goals in life, and then, the mundanity of parenting, or perhaps working as a prison guard, looking after society, protecting them, would be something that we would all kind of aim for. But it really just is slow and mundane, that kind of life. And so really what is key is to see that it is an overall experience that involves really two things. This concept of meaning, that one's life has and meaning. Many of the listeners may have read some of the work of Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, and the different survivors in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. And this concept of meaning is really quite critical in well-being. And then, of course, the aspect of pleasure, which most of us focus on, which is positive emotion. So just to make it super clear, happiness has got these two aspects. The one is the concept of pleasure, which has got to do with present benefit. Literally, how are you feeling in this moment right now? And then this other aspect of meaning, which has got to do with future benefit. And so we can kind of ask these two very separate questions that I think are quite profound. Some people would ask the question, am I happy? As if it is a yes or no question, as if it is this moment or state that we either have or don't have. But a preferred question in the conversation of happiness is, how can I become happier? And I certainly used to live in a space of, am I happy? And the answer was predominantly no, Marina, if I was sincere. And the more I have turned my narrative into one of, how can I become happier, the more empowered I have been to actually implement some of the techniques that can shift that in my life. I've got a few more things to share on what happiness is, Marina, but I just want to check in as to whether you've got any just comments on that so far.
I think they're just raising a different question when you say, so how can I become happier? That in itself is already a statement that I am happy. You already create a far more solid base in which to then phrase and frame everything else that you may come up with. Mark, maybe just as we are just unpacking or discussing this a little bit, maybe if I can just say, if anybody wants to pose any questions, you are more than welcome to do that. So if you, as we go through things, if anything pops up, please pose a question to us. And if you look at the bottom where it says chat, you can then post there, please. And we can respond to that either throughout the presentation or during our Q&A session. That would be great.
Thanks, Marina. So a couple more things then about happiness is there's a lot of myths around happiness. And this lady, Sonia Lyubomirsky, wrote a lot about how we head in a direction that is the opposite of happiness. For example, people think that happiness is something that needs to be searched for. as if it's kind of a destination that you arrive at rather than a journey that one is on. And so a myth that we believe is that we kind of search for happiness and we get it almost like an item. But that's not really the case at all, as we'll see as we explore it. The other one is thinking that, that it is circumstance dependent. In other words, it depends on the amount of money I earn, or the socioeconomic group that I'm in, or the type of person I marry, or the type of, the personality of the children that I have. And this is really just not true at all. And some amazing research there that we may touch on later, just around paraplegics and the impact of before and after an accident on their happiness levels. Fascinating research. Remind me if I forget to touch on it later. And then also research done on lottery winners. If ever there was a circumstance change, it is in winning the lottery. And just, some very crude evidence that even winning the lottery has a negligible impact on one's happiness. Then the fourth one there is specific life aspects. If I have a certain type of personality, that'll impact on my happiness. Or if I'm born in a certain country, that'll impact on my happiness. And then the last one there is that, I either have it or I don't. That happiness is this kind of binary thing. Some people are happy. Well, good luck to them. Well done. God's given gift to them. And others are just not. Some older theories of personality speak to a kind of more melancholy aspect of personality. So these are four aspects that are really just fundamentally untrue and don't align with the science of happiness. And really what does align is that you can kind of plot happiness on two paradigms, if you like. The one has got to do with looking ahead to the future, where the one has got a sense of contentment with the future and where one's life is heading. And the other one, of course, has got to do with the current moment, whether one is content or discontent with the current moment. And you can plot kind of four states or four ways of being, if you like. And the rat race, of course, is one that I think many of us get caught up in the present world, which is I'm building a future, I'm on the career trajectory. So my future has got a lot of contentment, but in terms of, the kind of present moment, there might not be a lot of contentment. Then nihilism is very much the kind of melancholic approach to life. This is learned helplessness. I'm not going anywhere with my career. There's not a very good outlook on the future. My future prospects are quite low, but also the present moment is really just not enjoyable at all. And so that would be kind of a nihilism position in life. And then there's the hedonism, the position of hedonism, which is it's all about the current moment. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, it's all about the present. But my life isn't really heading anywhere particularly fruitful. And of course, we can see on the top right over there, to achieve happiness, we need both that kind of beneficial future state in our lives that we know we're heading in a direction that we would want to go, and then also experiencing in the present moment these positive emotion moments that we experience. So this is just a helpful framework to look at in terms of happiness. Marina, any thoughts on that? Where would you, I don't know if I should ask where you would plot yourself. I know that I have typically been in the top left in my life, and I know many of us in a corporate space end up there.
Mark, just from a visual perspective. I mean, you are sharing a lot of things. I mean, you were now telling us, so you asked me where would I plot myself. Do you perhaps have some slides that you can share with us so that I can visually connect with what you are sharing?
Let me just show you then what I was talking about. But I mean, now that
I can see clearly now. That's exactly what I wanted. Thank you.
Oh, Marina, thank you. Apologies to those listening in. I think it is worth saying that Citadel had a whole test run before this, so they were absolutely professional. And of course, me and my little psychological excitement for happiness was not quite that much. So this is what I was describing, is that there's two dimensions. There is a dimension from top to bottom. In other words, a more optimistic future, or more of a focus on a future at the top and less of a focus on the future at the bottom. And then, of course, kind of left to right dimension, which has got to do with present happiness or present optimism. And the rat race is all about focusing on the future, but not very much focusing on the current pleasure. And that would be someone that's really just working the corporate ladder, but is not particularly enjoying life. You know, on the bottom there, I've spoken about the position of nihilism, hedonism we touched on, but happiness is really just wanting to get to a place of, you know, having this optimistic future state, but also being able to have moments in the present moment that are enjoyable. So, Marina, let's let the games begin. I would love to perhaps just share this one last slide, which is this picture that I think is most important, which obviously didn't come through, is that happiness really is made up of two parts. An aspect that has got to do with pleasure, which is present benefit, literally the emotion that you're experiencing in this moment. And I'm sure you were not experiencing good emotion in the previous moment, Marina. And so that pleasure has now improved, which is wonderful. And then meaning, future benefit, you know, the meaning has stayed relatively consistent through this webinar, because of course there is this wonderful meaning of the future benefit of helping some of your clients to just understand the science of happiness and how it applies in this current moment. So all we were saying at the beginning was that happiness, rather than being just on the one side of only pleasure, which is what we typically think it is actually made up of these two components. And this was the definition that I shared, that happiness is the overall experience of meaning and pleasure. It's not momentary. It's not a mood. It doesn't fluctuate. It's something that can be quite constant when it's made up of these two things. Yeah. So, Marina, now that we have visuals, should we jump on to why it matters? We'd love to hear just some of your thoughts on that.
I think that if we look at the interest in the link between happiness and life satisfaction, work productivity, and general health and well-being. Aristotle even said happiness is the object and design of our existence. Why do you think that happiness matters? And can you share some of the important research and statistics around it, just to put things in context for us?
Yeah, thanks, Marina. You know, in thinking through this, I'd just love us all to be aware that, you know, you mentioned Aristotle, and literally the thinking around happiness has gone back as long as that. More recently, probably in the last 50 years or so, primarily led by the likes of Martin Seligman, Peter Salovey, who are others, Daniel Goleman, a lot of the researchers that have birthed the world of emotional intelligence. You know, the scientific research around happiness has become more prominent in the world of psychology, especially since Martin Seligman coined the concept of positive psychology. And so I'm just saying that because, of course, we can't, in the space of this webinar, even remotely scratch the surface of all of the research. So I just wanted to pick out a few that might be quite prominent for some of the listeners this evening. And that is that, you know, there seems to be this link between health and happiness to the degree of 35% less flu being caught by people that are happy. So this is presented by research done by Dr. Peter van Jaarsveld. He's a wonderful South African psychologist. All my references are on the bottom left over there, and I'm happy to send through just where people can go and find them. But that there are 50% lower heart attacks. There's a 50% reduction in heart attack rates for people who are happier. And then there is a 70% reduction in early cancer mortality. In other words, people that have cancer with a similar prognosis, those that are happier have 70% less early mortality from cancer. So there really are some radical physiological impacts from happiness. Ultimately, I think, you know, something like this famous nun study that was done years ago might be quite helpful for people to see, because this has got to do with life expectancy. Very interesting research They took groups of nuns, and they actually did thematic analysis on their journaling. And the interesting thing about nuns is that they are quite confined in terms of the kind of life that they live. So they're an interesting sample because there's a low variance in terms of the kind of dynamics that could impact on them. And they did thematic analysis over a 50-year period on the journals that these nuns were writing. And they clustered them into two different groups. The one group they just considered to be the happy group, and the other group they considered to be the unhappy group. And they had a look at life expectancy. And what they found, you can see the ages there. At 85 years old, 34% of this sample was still alive in the unhappy group. And by the age of 94, only 11% of the unhappy group was still alive. And with the happy group, those where in their journaling, there were signs of happiness. 90% of that group was still alive at age 85, and 54% of that group was still alive at age 94. So, Marina, if you and I want to live through to 94, we just need to make sure that we use some of the happiness techniques we'll look at a little later. If we want to die a little earlier, we can just stay grumpy and unhappy, and that'll help to end us a little earlier. But certainly, happiness does have quite a radical impact on mortality. That's what we can see here. And then, it is very difficult to go into all the nuances of success, but basically there is quite a definite reciprocal relationship between happiness and success. And what's vitally important here is that success is not measured here in terms of financial wealth. It is measured in terms of relational success, familial success. In other words, still having optimal relationships with one's family, in terms of one's personal sense of success in life. And so happiness seems to cause success in those areas, and success in those areas seems to cause or precipitate seems to precipitate happiness. And so there really is this chicken and egg scenario that we need to be aware of as we look at happiness, that if we can cause ourselves to be happy, or to, what's the better word, to become constantly happier, then we can cause ourselves to be more successful in these parts of our lives. And as we are more successful in those parts of our life, we allow ourselves to become happier. And so this chicken and egg is quite important. And then two last quick things I'd love to touch on is just some interesting research that was done back in 2009. They literally, this is quite a massive sample size. This was 9,000 people in 47 different countries. Very interesting research. They literally just asked people a few different questions. And two of them were how they would rate the importance of happiness to this population, or to this sample. 9,000 is a fairly big sample size. But how they would rate the importance of happiness or going to heaven, how they would rate it from 1 to 10. And you can see there, the average was 8 out of 10 is people suggested that they rated happiness in their lives, compared to going to heaven only scored a 6.7. So Marina, of course, there might be different religious differences in there, some people might be on the highway to hell, I don't know. But certainly it seems like people were really just rating happiness as being much more important to them than even going to heaven. And ultimately, I think the big question for us is just a subjective one, quite apart from some of the science of happiness, is what would you choose? I'm quite aware that some of the listeners or the viewers of this webinar are sitting on the upper end of the kind of LSM levels, and so perhaps, as a viewer, you can ask yourself this question: why does happiness matter to you? Would you prefer to have more money, or would you prefer to have more happiness? And I think we all know those moments when we really have achieved, the big paycheck, the big achievement, the big financial success, and yet we sit with the proverbial hole in our soul. And so money or success in that respect is perhaps seen as a means to an end, where happiness is an end to itself. And Ben Shahar, one of the authors I mentioned earlier, talks about happiness as being a currency, that it really is the currency that humans live by, all the way back to Aristotle that you mentioned, Marina, and all the way up until now. And we'll have a look at some of the research from the Harvard study of adult development, that happiness really is the currency. It's the holy grail of human life, if you like. So that's just a little bit around why it matters, Marina.
So it is potentially to help you live longer, live a more fulfilling as you are journeying on this, can have an impact on your health, wealth, success. So Mark, just on this slide of yours, where I would just like to say, well, I don't think it is as binary, because it's either or. I don't think that it is, you have to choose between the two. Both of them can also be experienced and lived simultaneously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, the way you've just said that, Marina, is so critical, because there are, of course, those who are high income earners who are massively happy and flourishing and achieving well-being in their life and in their relationship. There are others who have all the wealth and prosperity from a kind of financial perspective that are just not happy at all. And that really is the crux of why this field of happiness is so important, is that we are able to impact on our happiness quite apart from our circumstances, which I think is part of what we'll look at in the rest of the webinar.
Okay. So why don't we then just delve into how, in your opinion, does happiness actually work?
Well, I always hesitate to share my opinion because I am not involved in the actual experiments of happiness. I just love the research that's been done out there and accumulating it and really just using it for my life and for other people's lives. And so I'd love to share two theories about how it works. The one is a theory known as the happiness set point from Sonja Lyubomirsky. And she did some research back in 2007 on the different proportions that contribute to happiness. And I want to ask this question. If I had to put these proportions in front of you and ask which one of these was attributed to genetics, which one of these was attributed to your life circumstances, and which one of these was attributed to your control, the control you have in happiness? I'd love, Marina, for you to just think about that and the listeners to think about it. It was quite counterintuitive for me. I thought when I first started looking at this research that I would only have about 10% of the control of my life. In other words, I could only kind of cause my happiness to fluctuate by about 10%. I also thought that about 50% of my happiness had to do with the circumstances in my life. Surely what I earned would have an impact on my happiness. Surely who I married, or what was going on in my life, or whether it was COVID or not. So I thought that was 50%. And then the 40%, have you just had a power outage there, Marina? I see we've got a nice power outage on your side.
I'm a ghost.
Shout out. It's right on point, Marina, because, happiness is not dictated by ESCOM. And then I would have thought that 40% was probably attributed to genetics. But what has been found is something very different, that 50% is from genetic tendencies. So we only have a 50% variance in our happiness in our lives. That, what that probably means is that in our lives, we're not going to be able to control 50%. If somebody is more kind of melancholic or more somber in their approach to life, they can't control all of it. But intentional activities have 40% variance, or account for 40% of the variance, and circumstances only account for 10% of the variance. And this is very interesting because it means that we do have a happiness set point, and mine might be higher than yours, Marina. I might be much more of a happy-go-lucky kind of person. You might be someone who's a little bit more melancholic, perhaps. My wife, Robin, and I are like that. I just happen to be a little bit more enthusiastic and happy than she is. She is a little bit kind of down in the dumps a lot of the time, not only because she's pregnant at the moment, Marina. But what's amazing about this research is that we can control 40% in the variance of our happiness. And that means that we really have a lot of control over the happiness that we can change. So this is the research around the happiness set point. And even if we have a certain happiness set point, we can shift it up by 40%, which is quite astounding. And for me, what was life-changing was that only 10% comes from our circumstances. Marina?
So one of the questions that was posed by one of our participants is, can you be happy if you have no money?
That is a fantastic question. I'd love to actually get onto that in some of the other theories. And probably what we need to go back to, you don't have the name of that listener, Marina? Anyway, let's call them Susie until we have another name. That person, it's a fantastic question, because what you are asking is, if our circumstances are such that we have nothing, can we be happy? And from this particular theory, it seems that with absolutely no money, that would only have a 10% negative impact on our happiness. Remember, this has not got to do with how easy life is, or whether we can pay the bills, or how much stress we have. It's got to do with whether we are able to have that sense of pleasure in emotion, and that sense of meaning in our lives. And so that's why you would see some parents that have absolutely nothing, who are living for their kids, or living for certain religious reasons, that have a huge amount of happiness in their lives. I'd love to move on, Marina, if that's okay.
Sorry, that's a question. Thanks, Daryl Wilson, for posing.
Daryl, thank you, Daryl. Yeah, please keep the questions coming in. And Marina, just interrupt me if there's a question that comes in. I can't see them coming in there. So this is the happiness set point. We've got 40% variance that we have control of in terms of our happiness. The next I want to touch on is something called the broaden and build theory by Barbara Fredrickson. And this is best described by this piece of research that was done on something called what's it called? The repertoire, the thought action repertoire. Sorry, my thoughts slipped me there for a moment. The thought action repertoire is something very easy to measure. It's literally the number of thoughts that you can think of doing, the number of actions you can think of taking in relation to a problem. It's a very measurable construct. And so in this particular research...
for men and women.
Yeah, it can be measured for men and women, Marina. But what's wonderful about it is, in this research, they literally gave participants a list of 20 lines on a piece of paper, and asked them to write down the number of things they could think to do, so the thought action repertoire, in relation to a problem that they were facing in their lives. And they just had to write down as many different things they could think of doing. And before they started writing, the participants were shown 5 different video clips. These were, of course, 5 different groups of participants. Some were shown a video clip that induced the emotion of joy, others contentment, another neutral emotion. The other one was fear, and then another one was anger. And you can see there on the bottom the number of actions that were listed on average by the participants. You can see that the average was 20 out of 20 for those that experienced joy. And what this means, Marina, is that for those that had experienced positive emotion, they could think of more actions to take. This is the broaden and build theory. It means that when we have positive emotion, we broaden and build what we are able to see in the world. And so it leads to something called an upward spiral, which we're all familiar with, and a downward spiral. When you're having a bad day, it seems like everything just goes wrong. You oversleep your alarm, and then there's more traffic. Then you spill your coffee on you. Then now you're frustrated. Now you have a fight with someone at work, and you fought with your kids. We all know about the downward spiral. But what's key is to see this broaden and build theory, that positive emotions, love and joy, contentment, etc., happiness, the emotion side of happiness, broadens the inventory of thoughts and actions that are available to us. So we have more options that we can think of and choose from in the world. And so this helps to build us. It develops our physical, mental, and social resources. And so then this leads to this transformative process. We live life better. And so this broaden and build theory means that happiness leads to more happiness. It's a powerful thing. And so part of happiness means using techniques that can conjure up positive emotion. Now, I'm just realizing that if we spend too much time talking about how happiness works, that we're going to run out of time, Marina. So I just want to touch on one last thought here, and that is this cycle of emotional addiction. I would love our listeners to be familiar with that. Essentially, if we had more time to go into the neuroscience, and I'll give some resources for people to go and do that, but essentially the pituitary gland releases certain chemicals in the brain through our thoughts. If these are thoughts of shame or anger in this example, they then come down to the cells in the body and they dock onto these docking sites called receptor sites. When we have more and more thoughts of anger or shame, which might be the situation in COVID right now, the cells go through a process we can see at the bottom there called upregulation. They make more docking sites for anger and shame. And when we make more docking sites in the cells in our body for shame and anger, the hypothalamus, the thermostat of the brain, says to our minds, send more shame and anger. And so we literally start interpreting the world through shame and through lenses of shame and anger. We'll get more angry with things around us, even if they are the same things we were facing before. And so this is called the cycle of emotional addiction. And part of what's powerful about this field of positive psychology and happiness and emotional intelligence is we can implement certain very specific techniques that can help to rewire some of this neural circuitry in the brain so we can undo some of our emotional addictions. And instead of always moving back to anger, frustration, negativity, pessimism, etc., being unhappy, we can actually rewire our brains to become primed for positivity, optimism, and ultimately happiness and flourishing. And so that's what really makes this field quite exciting, Marina.
If we just take there's, I mean, we could spend hours on this, and this is such a broad spectrum of things that we can cover to fully bring the picture across. But if it is then just from a what you are basic in your last couple of sentences when it comes to the spiraling up or spiraling down, that if I am addicted to negativity, I need to change my thinking around how can I be happier so that I can become addicted to happiness and seeing the positive things which would make me happier and which would enable me to spiral up towards being happier.
Absolutely. It's a little bit like pushing a car, Marina. It's very difficult to get it started, you know, and it's almost like pushing a car uphill a little bit, you know. We didn't get to go too much into some of the psychology of the way our life narratives develop. But in short, our life stories prime us to focus more on the negative aspects of our life. So it's like pushing a car uphill. Once you get some momentum, it becomes a little easier to push it. If you stop the momentum, it's going to roll backwards again. We're going to go back to our emotional addictions, our negativity. But if you push for long enough, eventually you can get over the hill and you can get exactly as you're saying, an upward spiral of quite literally an addiction to more positive ways of seeing the world. And there's many people that experience this by implementing certain specific techniques.
So if we then look at the, I just mentioned techniques. So what would be the elements on how you can promote happiness? What would be some of those techniques, tips, tricks to promote happiness, which we can maybe have as a takeaway to say, so these are some of the small little things that we can start to ignite the engine, to start pushing, to start build up momentum. And I
Yeah.
suppose that these techniques, irrespective of whether you find yourself on the quantum, these would be elements that even if a person had to be dealing with immense loss and grief, and how can you find happiness in that? I mean, grief in itself is a whole process, but how
Yeah.
could that, as a very traumatic event, and which obviously leaves a person with a lot of emotional
Mm, mm.
trauma, grief, sadness. Could these techniques in some way help an individual in a time of loss and grief as well?
Yeah, Marina, that's a very important question, and I'd love to answer it in two ways. The one is to share some techniques that can conjure up positive emotion, and another one is to share some techniques that can help us to manage negative emotion, because it's something that's very important in this field is the psychologists and researchers share again and again that we are not trying to evade or get rid of the negative experience of life, because that is not life. COVID happens, economies crash, people die, relationships hurt. What is key, and this is something quite important, is that some of these researchers have found we want to optimize our what they call a positivity ratio. And so, one of the first things that listeners can do to start improving or developing happiness in their lives is to watch their positivity ratio. And the recommendation is that it is 3 to 1. In fact, what they did originally, and this was from Barbara Fredrickson, was they did research in organizations looking at those that were flourishing financially and culturally in the organization. And they found that doing qualitative research, there was a 3 to 1 positive to negative ratio of messaging, communications that was happening in that organization. Gottman is the great researcher on relationships, and he found a 5 to 1 positives to negative ratio for a healthy marriage. So somewhere between 3 to 1, 3 positives to 1 negative, and 5 positives to 1 negative in a marital situation is what is going to lead to flourishing happiness and well-being. So how do we do that? Now, I just want to share a couple of slides here. This acronym PERMA comes from Martin Seligman in his book Flourish. And he suggests that there are 5 different types of activities that we need to do, and I'm going to share some specific ones, but these are the activity themes. The one is to conjure up positive emotions. The other one is engagement, and this is the work from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi around flow. That would be the concept of engagement. Relationships, meaning, finding meaning in life, and then achievement. This is PERMA, and I'm just going to share a few very specific techniques quickly that can help us to look at how to do that. And the listeners can go and do that in their own time. So the one is a technique called 3 good things. And this is where you literally write down 3 positive things that have happened in the last 24 hours. And then you write down or you think about why those 3 good things were able to happen. So my wife made me a cup of coffee today. I didn't ask her. She made me a cup of coffee. Do you know how long it's taken, Marina, to get my wife to make me coffee? You know, she loves being the one getting a cup of tea made. Now, why was that good thing possible? Well, it was possible because we've been working really hard at our marriage. Her love language is gifts, not acts of service. Mine is acts of service. And that's her way of doing an act of service and showing me that she loves me. She's pregnant at the moment, so she's really uncomfortable. And her making me a cup of coffee was actually her way of going, I'm going to overcome my discomfort and I'm going to go and serve Mark, this obnoxious husband of mine, you know. So there's a whole lot of wonderful reasons why just a cup of coffee. I mean, we've got money to pay for coffee, Marina. What's happening in the rest of South Africa at the moment? We live in a home where we can make coffee. Eskom wasn't out, so the kettle could turn on. I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons why that one little cup of coffee could conjure up a whole lot of gratitude. So this 3 good things technique, by the way, comes with a lot of research, and I really wish we had time to look at it. But essentially, you can see in this research, Martin Seligman took a placebo group and a group that did 3 good things. And you can see in the blue, there was a reasonably stable level of depressive symptoms, and there was a complete regression over 6 months in the depressive symptoms for the 3 good things group. So this can help to overcome some of those negative emotions that you were mentioning. But also then in terms of happiness levels, you can see there was a slight spike in happiness levels for the placebo group, but then they went back to a baseline. But there was a slow progression over a 6-month period. And by the way, this was 6 months after the intervention, which was just 1 week long, of doing 3 good things every day. So 3 good things is a well-established, powerful, positive psychology technique. Can I share another one, Marina?
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of people that says, yeah, blah, 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 like positive affirmations, doing this or that. It doesn't work. So what you are saying is that you need to just doing it for 1 day, or just doing 3 good things tonight before I go to bed is not going to make a difference. It's a very simple, easy technique, but that from a neuroscience perspective, from all other angles, from a research perspective, it is a very simplistic, basic little tool, but it does give results, or it is a tool, is something that can help build more resilience and help you to see the world through different perspective.
Absolutely. You know, Marina, what you've touched on there is at the heart of it. This is not about writing down 3 little nice things and why they happened. It's about rewiring the neural circuitries in the brain and overcoming our emotional addictions. And so, you know, just like physical fitness in the gym, if you go and do one, set of push-ups, of 10 push-ups at the beginning of January, and then you never do them again, and you say, your exercise doesn't work. It didn't work for me. Well, you're an idiot. Of course it didn't work. You did 10 push-ups and then you stopped. You didn't do any more. That's not how exercise works. And in the same way with any of these positive psychology techniques, doing them once, or, you know, one Friday evening with a glass of wine, that's not going to change anybody's life, you know. But again and again and again, to rewire those neural circuitries, that's what's going to cause change. There's another technique that's very quick to share if the listeners go and Google it. And this is one that can help people to stay away from negative emotion and to have more optimal emotions. It's called the ABCDE technique. It's by Albert Ellis, who is the famous psychologist that developed rational emotive behavioral therapy. You can just go type ABCDE technique, Albert Ellis, into Google. And this is a powerful technique, especially for accountants, Marina, because it literally is a way of almost like a debit and a credit, almost like keeping your books well. This technique helps you to keep your psychology well. And we don't have time to go into it now, but essentially it is a way of structuring your thinking. Another one is doing a gratitude visit. This is a premeditated writing out a gratitude letter of what you appreciate about somebody that's had a big influence in your life, and going to share this through a visit with them. Of course, now it could be on Zoom or Skype or whatever. But just a reminder, you know, we didn't touch on this research, but one of the biggest longitudinal studies on happiness was done through Harvard University. It's called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And there's a great, fantastic TED talk on it. But essentially what they found after 75 years of tracking 725 men, and yes, this was in the very patriarchal days of psychology, Marina, sorry about that. But what they found is that good relationships keep us happier and healthier. And they found that relationships, good, strong relationships, lead to health and happiness, that quality is better than quantity. In other words, don't increase all your Facebook friends, rather just have a few where there's quality, and that working on them is what leads to healthiness. So the gratitude visit that I've shared here is a powerful way of doing that. Giving praise to people is another one. You know, finding ways of catching people doing something right. And then another one is using signature strengths that we don't have time for now, but each day finding a different way to use one of your signature strengths. And of course, the listeners can go and do a strengths profile either on MyGrow or through Gallup Strengths Finder or any one of those online platforms. So that's a little bit of how to develop it, Marina.
Thank you, Mark. We have, we have 5 minutes left of our session. Richard Hawkins, I do hope that the question that you posed around how to achieve happiness have been answered in some way. If not, please respond. Let's just see if we can. I also just want to say that we will also share more information. Let's see if I can just find any other. Oh, Richard, thank you. Yes, I am okay. Appreciate that. Gertina van Skalkwyk asked, how does the concept of responsibility fit in with the definitions of happiness that you presented? Viktor Frankl also said, we can pursue happiness. How would you respond to that statement, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is an absolutely brilliant question, Marina. You know, the question actually comes down to something that comes from anthropology and sociology, which is viewing the world on a spectrum from systemic problems through to problems with the agent in the system. And the amount of agency that we think we have is primarily linked to the way we view ourselves. Often it's referred to as self-efficacy, but what's also linked with it is things like self-esteem, optimism, a lot of emotional intelligence competencies. And so this aspect of taking responsibility, the best way that I can share it from the theory we've looked at so far is to have a look. Let me just try and find the slide here, is to see that we really have a 40% variance or 40% ability to have responsibility for our happiness. We can't really control the genetic tendencies. We don't really have a lot of control of our circumstances unless they are secondary circumstances. In other words, we're in a downward spiral and we're making poor decisions. But what we really do have is just a huge, I mean, from a psychological perspective, to have 40% variance in the control of your happiness levels is massive. And so the responsibility we have is huge. I do just want to share that some of the research done in the build up to the field of positive psychology was around things like learned helplessness, where over a period of time, people's agency can be sucked out of them. And it becomes quite possible then for people to think that they are unable to take responsibility for themselves. A little bit like I'm sure you've heard that famous story of, how do they get the circus elephants to stay tied to this little rod in the ground? Well, they just tie them from a young age. And many people have got a psychological story through their lives of helplessness, worthlessness, being not good enough. And part of the power of these techniques is that, in fact, they can slowly over time, even if somebody feels like they don't have agency, it helps them to slowly start rewiring those neural circuitries so that they can take agency. So that's the la-di-da way of saying, sometimes people just need to make it a firm decision. There are writers that write about that. But ultimately, it's about rewiring those neural circuitries. Yeah, Marina.
Mark, we have run out of time. And we've got a question from Nick Mold as well, just saying that, how important is physical activity in happiness as well? And I think that there are so many techniques and there are so many other elements like keeping your physical body healthy to help with mental happiness and health and everything. Everything is very interlinked, and we unfortunately do not have enough time to cover quite an extensive, in-depth topic on happiness. George, does happiness last for a long period, or does one need to be maintained? Yes, George, it's like showering. You have to do cleanliness. You have to do it each and every day. So practice, 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 rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. Thank you for everybody that has participated. I hope that you have been able to gain some insight. As I said, this is a very big topic. We will be sharing Mark's slides. We will also be sharing other ways in which you can further engage with us, as well as more research and techniques and whatever that Mark from MyGrow will then make available to you as an audience. And yeah, this is a journey, this is a process, and step by step we can make a difference. So thank you very much, Mark. Thank you to everybody for your participation, and we will be in touch, and please keep an eye out for more information and more sharing and more possibilities of taking this topic further. So may you all answer the question, so how can I be happier? Thank you very much. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Marina. Bye-bye for now.